Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is John Harris, and I'm the International Education Lead at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. I'm delighted to be back conducting this latest In Conversation recording, and we have a very special guest, Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain, from the Knowledge Transfer Network, and she specialises in the rail discipline. Welcome, Daisy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, John.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to some really informative pieces here from Daisy today. Daisy, perhaps you'd like to start off just by introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, I'm Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain, and I work for KTN, formerly the Knowledge Transfer Network, as you say. And we are essentially an innovation networking agency. So we work across the UK and globally, and I am the rail lead at KTN. So sitting within the transport team, all things trains, stations, and rail in general.
Excellent. And we're picking on a particular angle today, aren't we, Daisy? We're going to be looking at digitalisation, which is our current big theme, and how all things digital, I guess, is reflected in the rail sector. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you. A lot of our audience is global, so I'm sure people will be interested to get in touch with you afterwards. And I think the exciting thing here is we're not just talking about trains, we're talking about a wide spectrum, aren't we? Trains, technology, behind the scenes. Digitalization's everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And it's an element that rail has been picking up more and more of in the UK and in a global sense as well. So it's definitely a real piece of ongoing work, but a really exciting piece as well.
Okay, I mean, just tell us a little bit about your experiences at KTN. So you're leading with rail now, but tell us a little bit about your journey into the job you do now.
Oh, well, I had a non-traditional journey into rail. So I actually started in the weird and wonderful world of community rail. So for those of you outside the UK in particular, you may not know much about community rail. It's a pretty UK specific phenomenon. And essentially it's exactly what it says on the tin. So it is the community side of the railway network, and it's thousands of volunteers across the UK and the occasional paid officer, which is what my role was, and really looking after the communities and societies that actually intersect with the railway. So as part of that, for example, I set up the UK's first autism-friendly railway line.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole subject of its own. And yeah, certainly looking at this whole issue of skills capacity, looking at the voluntary and community sector, that's a part of it, because we don't want digital to be exclusive, do we? We want this to benefit everybody.
Yeah, exactly. We've got to have that balance between digital and technology and the human factors. So if the services and the digitization doesn't work for the people, both the users and the staff, then there's not really a whole lot of point doing it. So there's definitely that balance between the human and community side and then the technological side as well.
I mean, I think that's the nub of our discussion today, isn't it? That we're looking at digital is really, really good, and there's, you know, money there to invest and explore and innovate. But actually, who does it benefit? Who is the end customer? And of course, in rail, the customers can be operating companies, it can be the government in a country, it can be the rolling stock owners and manufacturers. But of course, it all comes down to the travelling public and whether they actually feel that there's a difference.
Yeah, exactly. It all comes down to the customer in a passenger sense and in a freight sense, and how that actually matches up to the needs of the different customers, the different societies, the different nations, and how we all work together across this agenda.
Fantastic. Now, we know that KTN has got a great spectrum of projects on at the moment. Towards the end, everyone, you'll be able to get the links to the website and you can have a look at all the various projects that are currently being sponsored and developed. We've only got time to look at 3 of them, but we've asked Daisy to focus on different aspects of digitalization. So hopefully there'll be some takeaways for every single member and inquirer that's viewing today. So with no more ado, we're going to come back and have a chat in a minute, Daisy, but we're going to ask you just to roll through those 3 case studies and take us through kind of the key points you want to get over to us. And then I'll meet you in about 15 minutes.
Wonderful. So yes, looking specifically at digital innovation successes in rail. And I've told you a little bit about what KTN does. We are an innovation networking agency, but more specifically, we increase that access to new markets. We use a really wide range of contacts and networks to do that across government and businesses of every size, from multinationals to SMEs. And we can also help with guidance, accessing funding, and really the whole gambit of innovation, development, and success. We've got teams in everything, of course, transport to infrastructure, but as you can see, agri-food, chemistry, design, biotechnology, the creative and digital industries, and really everything in between as well. So there's always going to be someone available to help you and to have a chat at KTN. And this is what we're all about. So it's that expertise, it's making those powerful connections nationally and globally, and it's shaping the future across all of those industries that I just talked about. And of course, in the transport team, as you'd expect, our focus is the transport system of the future. So it's that efficiency, the safety, the cleanliness, the sustainability angle, inclusion, and again, everything in between. So I'm the rail lead, but my colleagues work across aviation, maritime, low emissions mobility, and beyond. And of course, there's so much crossover between all those industries that we all work together extremely closely. So looking specifically at some of the examples, we've chosen a few themes within digital innovation and digital technologies in rail. And one of those themes, of course, is inclusion, which, especially in light of COVID, is one of our biggest priorities for the network. So really making sure that everyone who wants to access rail, everyone in our communities, is able to confidently use the rail network. So that includes provision of information, that includes better multimodal transport and integration as well. Integration with active travel, it includes ticketing and, you know, everything beyond really. And as it says there, passenger information in those multiple forms, and this is really where the digital world comes in. So thinking about, yes, the written form, but the visual, the auditory, in the environment, and then digitally as well. And honestly, that makes rail easier for everyone to use, not just disabled passengers or passengers with reduced mobility. It just makes the rail system an easier network to navigate. And of course, there's huge potential for AI as well. So data-backed assistants, for example, and chatbots for that real-time information. CCTV has been an enormous one, and monitoring AI during COVID in particular. So looking at those pinch points and looking at that crowd control. And then also things like driver information systems obviously can have enormous benefits for the drivers themselves and for the staff who actually work in the network. And inclusion isn't, you know, an optional thing anymore. As we learn more about our societies, as we become more inclusive, generally speaking, this is a really key need for us in a global context now. So this is one of the most important areas that we could be looking at in rail currently. And one of the really fantastic projects that has taken place in this area actually took place at Euston Station in London, which was the first railway station in the country to provide passenger information using British Sign Language. And of course, for those of you who don't know, Euston is a Network Rail managed station. So they've invested over £1 million to develop this programme with British Sign Language. And in an absolute first, you can also have live sign language. So as situations involve, other, you know, disruptions or cancellations, whatever other incident it might be, within the hour, you can have British Sign Language messaging uploaded directly to the screens. So really a responsive and agile system there. And then thinking specifically about sustainability. So of course, again, this is an absolutely enormous global challenge and something that we absolutely have to switch to that more environmentally focused way of operating, both in terms of rolling stock and in the built environment, and also thinking about modal shift and how we really encourage passengers and customers in the freight sense to shift to using rail. And it's absolutely essential for the UK, because for those of you who don't know, we have our net zero target by 2050, and other countries around the world will have their own net zero targets. And there are so many innovations in this space. So within sustainability, we've got on-site decarbonisation, noise reduction. Of course, there's biodiversity, the lightweighting, the energy systems, maintenance systems, in rolling stock again, and then of course in the built environment and station design. So it's a really enormous scope of competition and innovation that we can tackle here. And speaking of competitions, one of the biggest that I work with, certainly with my colleagues at Innovate UK, is within the first of a kind rail competitions. that are a rolling competitions programme that take place in the UK on a yearly basis. That's funded by the DFT, the Department for Transport, and delivered by Innovate UK, and of course supported by KTN. And it's really about supporting the new ideas, the agile ideas, and responding to needs in rail, very quickly. We know that programs in rail can take an enormously long time to come to fruition, and the idea behind First of a Kind is that we can help to give the best of the best a boost, to get into the system rapidly and to start having a very quick impact. And one of those programs, as you can see here, is the Rail Freight Energy and Emissions Calculator. And this was funded through First of a Kind this year, so First of a Kind 2021. And as it says, to meet that 2050 net carbon neutral, net zero target, there's a real challenge for the freight industry. So for freight operating companies, we have a legacy fleet issue of diesel locos. And of course, the electrification program in the UK remains an issue, particularly for freight, as we need to have, well, a rolling program of electrification that is sped up to meet those targets. So freight operating companies are actively looking at ways that they can decarbonise, that they can clean up those diesel trains, but a detailed energy and emissions calculator doesn't currently exist. So the funding through First of a Kind 2021 is where the University of Hull comes in with their calculator to be deployed on the existing Network Rail platform. So the Network Rail Plus platform is the first digital platform that describes the entire UK rail network's capability, and it will be augmented with the gradient and line speed data, train performance data, the on-train monitoring data to deliver a low-cost emissions calculation and mapping system. And it will be able to calculate how train speed changes over time, the power that's required, and the time taken to traverse a particular section of track. So then we've got obviously the potential there to look at the analysis of that particular stretch of track and deliver more efficient strategies. So by including the energy and emissions factors in freight bids, planners of course will be able to think about emissions much more closely when it comes to timetabling, be able to make more informed decisions about things like the length of freight trains and the impact of emissions on delayed services. But of course, a huge amount of work that takes place in rail obviously happens behind the scenes. So in those digital processes, in the IT, in the communications, and it's all, of course, streamlined for efficiency and for safe operations and safety of passengers and staff as well. And within this is the need to really ensure that systems are as effective as they possibly can be. So prioritising ease for staff to use them, but also safety internally and for passengers, as I said. So all sorts of things around connectivity, Internet of Things, AI that I've already touched on, and of course the opportunities through 5G really come in here in that digital transformation opportunity. And one of the examples that again funded through First of a Kind, but this time last year, so 2020, is the IRIS system, which is the information system for railway station staff. And the IRIS display equips staff with a better communication mechanism, so it's faster, it's richer, it has more accurate information from different sources that are all pulled into the single view that you can see here on the screen, and a real-time passenger count as well, which is reported directly in the system. So the features allow staff to be much more agile in their decision making. They can understand the situation much more rapidly and be able to report back changes and new developments to control officers more quickly and efficiently. And you can see here the real-time integrated alert board. So this is the system where you can view all the journeys relevant to a particular station or a particular line. This is all integrated, as it says, and it's all updated in real time. So journey progression, real-time locations of trains, and keeping up to date with the real-time data and the messaging as well. And as you can see, it's a very straightforward, user-friendly interface, so integrated messages from staff email and from various sources of data, and color-coded disruption messages. So again, at a glance, you can understand the disruptions and the delays as a staff member. And again, viewing passenger numbers on the platform in real time. And then again, communication. So being able to raise incidents and get assistance immediately at platform level, being able to communicate with control and other stations across the network. Of course, when there are incidents, being able to comment on and report those immediately, and also logging incident records for future references, and being able to search historical records in that sense as well. And then finally, of course, we come full circle back to the inclusion agenda and accessibility within rail. So that real-time integrated assistance board. Assistance remains a key issue for rail, particularly in the United Kingdom. So many of our processes are still paper-based. There is definitely progress happening in this space. We have our new passenger assist app, for example, but it's still a work in progress. So this particular staff enhancement allows assistance requests to be viewed for a selected journey and a particular line, to register assistance for those journeys, and also, of course, to alert staff to notify them of incoming assistance needs. So that was a real whistle-stop tour race through a couple of examples in much more detail. As you can see here, you've got my email address. I'm very happy to talk to anyone nationally and internationally as well. You can see that we've got my Twitter handle there, and please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And I would invite you to have a look at the case studies under the rail section on KTN's website, or indeed the entire transport section has some very interesting case studies as well. And I will hand back over to you, John.
Well, thank you so much, Daisy, for packing so much insight and so much evidence of what KTN's been doing into just 15 minutes. Let's just finish off, if we can, with a couple of questions and observations. If we go back to the freight calculator and the emissions, as you know, there's some big questions going on at the moment around macro carbon savings, and CILT ourselves internationally, we're involved in the debate around movement east-west, west-east between UK, Europe, Central Asia, China, and really where rail can plug the gap and get some very significant carbon and efficiency savings. Do you think your emissions calculator is going to be capable of being applied for wider international modelling for carbon savings?
Oh, absolutely. I have no doubt. So regardless of the systems that are obviously being used in the operation and sense across Europe and into Asia, the ultimate kind of basics behind the system are looking at the track, the speed itself, the gradient, the particular units that you might be using in terms of the trains themselves. And it's really looking at how a specific stretch of track can be optimized. So the length of that, as long as a piece of string, really, and it doesn't particularly matter what conditions that track are operating under, because you can calculate that within the emissions calculator. So it's really helpful, I think, to understand it, particularly in a planning sense, how we can really optimize those emissions, as you say, on a much larger scale.
So this could be used if we're talking in an international trade scenario, if we want to map out possible carbon savings, if we want to look at alliances, if we want to look at interoperability. Yeah, we can kind of build that into the thinking there, can't we?
Exactly. And I think that that's a really relevant piece at the moment in particular, because we've seen the vulnerabilities of things like, road freight and the vulnerabilities that are happening at the moment with driver shortages, for example. Freight trains only need one driver. So you can haul a lot more with a lot less. So realistically speaking, it's definitely an enormous positive, both in terms of efficiency, but as we say, emissions as well, and sustainability.
Yeah, I think one thing we're seeing as a common trend in all of our conversations is this digital and decarbonisation link. Sustainability and equality and inclusion, you can't separate that from the digital agenda, and your case studies have clearly demonstrated that. Let's go on to the other two case studies that you showed, because the one thing that really stood out to me in both of those is it's almost giving total visibility, isn't it? I know that they are, in essence, dashboards, but for different people. So for the station staff, for example, in one, and for customers in another. But the fact that you've got total visibility means that you can be agile as a customer and make informed choices. And actually, if you're having to juggle a lot of tensions or issues at a station where you've got overcrowding, cancellations, trains late, or trains that are shorter than they should be, you're prepared for it. It's almost that there's a wave here of digital improvement that allows people to almost have that second sight, isn't it, Daisy?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's one of the most important issues that we have, nationally and globally is that information piece, and that's information and communications, as you say, for passengers and for staff, because they do interplay with each other. When you've got better informed passengers, then it's easier for staff to do their job, and vice versa. So better informed staff are able to make sure that customer satisfaction is higher, because they're able to, give passengers more accurate real-time information, and vice versa. And then, of course, also thinking about things like safety considerations. So when you do get that train coming in that is perhaps shorter, it's been short formed, you can make sure as a staff member that you're able to keep customers safe and happy, and then immediately give them information about their onward journey. So it all feeds into each other.
And of course, what we can do is capture that real-time information on the day to make the snap decisions. But also you can look at it over a period of time, look at trends, look at how an operator or a station location can improve its operating regime. And I guess it's a strategic management tool as well, isn't it, to introduce better and smarter customer service?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the trends changing at the moment is so relevant, because especially in light of the pandemic and, the impact of COVID on things like commuting, if we're not going back to that 9 to 5 peak hour, at the start of the day and the end of the day, 5 days a week, then we need to understand what trends will look like for passengers in the future. And of course, that then feeds into everything around planning, feeds into the way that we construct our future stations, it feeds into how we manage staffing and everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, let's bring it right full circle back to that human nature. I mean, I absolutely love the Euston case study there, where, you've used digital in its latest formats to just give simple, easy, accessible information to a group that previously would have struggled. They'd have had to have found somebody that could have sign language, or someone could have used a handheld app, and there could have been a conversation. But here it's, it's up there and it's in time. How important is it, you think, for the rail industry as a whole, that we keep our eyes fixed on that end customer goal in everything that we do with digital? Do you think it's good to do digital innovation just for the sake of it, or do you think there needs to be a real community purpose at the end of it?
I think everything that we do has to come back to the passenger and the customer in both a passenger and a freight sense. If we're not actually keeping our eyes fixed on the end goal of popular, efficient, well-maintained, well-managed services, then realistically, we're not operating a network that's worth operating. And I think that that's what Euston really demonstrates, is it is, a program that was done with the end user in mind, and it was very much constructed and planned alongside the end user. So that lived experience element, again, making sure that we're talking to the customer, making sure that we're talking to the passenger, making sure that we're actually involving community groups and social groups and the person itself in that program, to make sure that whatever we end up with is, as effective as it possibly can be.
No, absolutely, Daisy. So we're nearly out of time, but one final question. I just want you to stand back and say, well, where do you think the digital railway is now going? What's the trends? Where's the emphasis going to go in the types of projects we're likely to see in, let's say, the next 5 years, both in the UK or internationally?
Well, I think certainly in the UK, one of our biggest focus is, of course, is going to continue to be European train control systems. The overall signalling and communications and management digitization in that sense it's going to be an enormous agenda for years to come. And similarly, electrification. So there's going to be so much work that we need to do around, I guess, what you'd call the really basic big pieces. But then thinking specifically, I guess, in a more general sense as well, and looking at it in a more international context, it really is that passenger focus that we've just been talking about. So looking at inclusion, looking at digital ticketing. I mean, ticketing is a really good example, because it's better for the customer, because you don't have to, worry about your tickets. You have more information, you have real-time information that comes through rather than just a simple paper ticket. But then similarly, it's better for the operator as well, because they get more data, and of course they save money and are more sustainable because of a lack of printing costs. So I think it's the wins like that build up to really big pieces of work around inclusion and sustainability and cleaner services and better managed built environments in terms of wayfinding and information. And all of that adds up really to just improved rail systems in an international context. So for me, it's all about going back to the customer focus.
I mean, with that, going back to the customer focus, that's a really good point to end on there, Daisy. Can I just say a huge thank you to Daisy for being with us today on this webinar. We hope you found it inspirational, challenging. There's certainly something here for everyone in our international audience. So please don't forget to check out the KDN website, or indeed get in touch with Daisy direct. So it just remains for me to say a very, very, very big thank you to Daisy for her time. So this was Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain in conversation with John Harris. Please enjoy the rest of your day.